Canterbury Tales Prologue in prose. With his sweet showers, April has pierced to the root the drought of March, and bathed every vine in liquid, the virtue of which makes the flowers start when Zephyrus, with his sweet breath, has quickened the tender shoots in every heath and holt. The young sun has sped his half-course in the ram. The little birds make their melodies, and all the night sleep with open eyes, because nature inspires them in their hearts. Then folk long to go on pilgrimages, and palmers to seek strange shores too. The far shrines of saints known in sundry lands, and especially from every shire's end of England, they journey to Canterbury to visit the holy blessed martyr, who helped them when they were sick. It occurred on a day in that season, as I rested at the Tabard in Southwark, ready to wend on my pilgrimage to Canterbury, with a heart full devout, that at night there came into that hostel a company of sundry folk, 29 of them by chance, fallen in fellowship, and all were pilgrims that would ride toward Canterbury. The chambers and stables were spacious, and we were fairly entertained. When the sun was at rest, I had spoken with every one of them so that I was of their fellowship, and we agreed to rise early and travel together. While I have time and space before I pass further in this tale, it seems reasonable to tell you about each of them, what folk they were, and what estate and how they looked. First, I will begin with the knight. A knight, a worthy man, there was that since he first rode out loved chivalry, truth and honor, courtesy and liberality. Fully courageous, he was in battle for his lord, and no man had ridden farther in Christendom and heathen lands, and he was honored for his bravery. He was at Alexandria when it was won. Many times in Prussia, he had sat first at board above all the nations. In Lithuania he had warred, and in Russia no Christian of his degree so often. In Granada, he had also been at the siege of Algeciras, and ridden into Belmarais. He was at Châtelet and Liège when they were won, and in the Great Sea, he had been with many a noble army. He had been at 15 mortal battles, fought for our faith 3 times in the lists at Tramezzine, and slain his foe. This same worthy knight had fought once for the Lord of Palatine against another heathen host in Turkey. And evermore, he had a sovereign repute, and though he was fearless, he was wise and as meek of his bearing as a maid. He never yet in all his life spoke discourtesy to any manner of man. He was a very perfect gentle knight. But to tell you of his accoutrement, his horses were good, but he was not gaily clad. He wore a fustian tunic, all rust-stained by his coat of mail, for he had lately come from his travel and went to make his pilgrimage. With him was his son, a young squire, a lusty novice in arms, and a lover with locks curled as they had been laid in press. He was, as I reckon, some 20 years of age. He was of moderate height, wondrously handy, and great of strength. He had sometimes been in the wars in Flanders, Artois, and Picardy, and borne him well for so little time, hoping to stand in his lady's grace. He was embroidered like a meadow, full of fresh flowers, red and white. All day long he was singing or piping on the flute. He was as fresh as May. His gown was short, with sleeves wide and long. Well could he sit his horse and ride fairly. He could make songs, well indite a thing, joust and dance and draw well and right. It was so hot he loved that he slept no more than the nightingale by night. He was courteous, lowly, and diligent to serve, and carved before his father at the table. A yeoman had this knight, and no other servants at that time, for he preferred to ride so. This yeoman was clad in a coat and hood of green, and bore a bundle of peacock arrows bright and sharp, full thriftily under his belt. He could dress his hunting tackle like a true yeoman. His arrow feathers were not draggled out of line. He bore a mighty bow in his hand, and well he knew all the practice of woodcraft. He had a head round like a nut and a brown face. On his arm, he bore a gay bracer, and by his side a buckler and sword, and, on the other side, a gay dagger, well harnessed and sharp as a spear point. On his breast was a medal of St. Christopher of bright silver. He bore a horn with a baldric of green. I think in truth he was a forester. There was also a nun, a prioress, who was smiling, simple, and quiet. Her greatest oath was by St. Loy, and she was called Madame Eglantine. Full well she sang divine service, full seemly intoned in her nose. And French she spoke fair and prettily, after the school of Stratford at Bow, for to her French of Paris was unknown. At meat she was well taught, she let no morsel fall from her lips, nor did she wet her fingers deep in her sauce. She could carry well a morsel, and take good care that no drop fell on her breast. She took much pleasure in good manners. She wiped her upper lip so clean that, when she had drunk her draught, no bit of grease could be seen in her cup. She reached seemly after her meat, and in truth she was very diverting and pleasant and amiable of bearing, and took pains to imitate the manners of court, and be stately of demeanor, and to be held worthy of the highest respect. But to speak of her conscience, she was so charitable and full of pity she would weep if she saw a mouse caught in a trap if it were dead or bleeding. Small hounds she had that she fed with roast flesh or milk and cake bread. But sorely she wept if one of them died, or if men smote it sharply with a rod, and she was all conscience and tender heart. Her wimple was fluted, her nose was prettily shaped, her eyes grey as glass, her mouth small and soft and red. But truly her forehead was fair, I believe it was almost a span high, for certainly she was not undergrown. Her cloak was graceful. About her arm, she wore a set of small coral beads with knobs of green, and on it hung a brooch of bright gold on which was written first a crowned A, and afterward Amor vincit omnia. She had another nun with her, her chaplain, and 3 priests. A monk there was, exceedingly worthy, a bailiff to his house, who loved hunting, a manly man, well fit to be abbot. He had many a dainty horse in stable, and when he rode, men might hear his bridle jingling in a whistling wind as clear and loud as the chapel bell, where this lord was prior, because the rule of Saint Mar or Saint Benedict was old and somewhat strict. This same monk let old things pass, and held his course after the new world. He gave not a plucked hen for that text, which says hunters are not holy, nor that a monk outside a cloister is like a fish out of water. That text he held was not worth an oyster, and I told him his opinion was good. Why should he study and make himself mad, always poring upon a book in a cloister, or drudge and labor with his hands as St. Austin ordered? How shall the world be served? Let Austin have his toil kept for himself. Therefore, he spurred his horses hard, he had greyhounds as swift as fowl in flight, and all his heart was set on spurring and hunting the hare, and he would refrain for nothing. I saw his sleeves edged at the wrist with grey fur, and it was the finest in the land. To fasten his hood at the throat, he had a pin curiously wrought of gold, with a love knot at the larger end. His head was bald and shone as a glass, and his face showed as if he had been anointed. He was in good trim, a full fat lord. His eyes glittered, rolled in his head, and glowed like the furnace beneath a cauldron. His boots were supple, his horses in fine case. Certainly he was a fair church official. He was not pale as a purgatorial ghost, a fat swan he loved best of any flesh. His palfrey was as brown as a berry. A friar there was cheerful, wanton, a limiter, and a self-important man. In all the 4 orders, none knows so much of dalliance and fair speech. He had made full many a marriage of young women at his own cost. He was a noble pillar unto his order, fully well beloved and familiar with franklins everywhere in his country and with the town's worthy women. For he had the power of confession, as he himself said, more than a parson, for he was a licentiate of his order. Full sweetly he heard confession, and pleasant was his absolution. He was an obliging man to grant penance to those from whom he should get a good meal. For to give to a poor order is a sign that a man is well forgiven of his sins. If a man gave, the friar swore he knew that he was repentant. Many a man is so hard of heart that he will not weep even though he is sore in pain. Therefore, men may give silver to the poor friars instead of prayers and weeping. His scarf was always stuffed with knives and pins to give to fair dames. He had a merry voice, he could sing well and play on the harp. At singing ballads, he gained the palm utterly. His neck was as white as the flower de luce, and he was as strong as a champion. He knew the taverns in every town and the innkeepers and tapsters better than the lepers and beggars. For it did not suit the dignity of such a worthy man to have acquaintance with sick lepers. It does not seem to profit a person to deal with such poor rubbish, but rather with rich folk and tavern keepers. And wherever profit might arise, he was courteous and lowly in serving. Nowhere was a man so productive. He was the best beggar of his order. Though a widow had no shoes, his preaching was so pleasant that before he went, he would have a farthing from her. The proceeds of his begging were better than his rents. And he could romp like a puppy. On love days, he could put on a show, for he was not like a cloistral monk or a poor scholar with a threadbare cloak, but he was dressed like a doctor or pope. His garment was of double worsted cloth and stood out around him like a bell, fresh from the press. He lisped a little out of wantonness to make his English sweet on his tongue and in his harping. When he had done singing, his eyes twinkled in his head as the stars in the frosty night. This worthy limiter was called Hubert. A merchant with a forked beard was in motley, and he sat high on a horse. A Flemish beaver hat on his head, his boots clasped neat and fair. He spoke his opinions grandly, always tending to the increase of his own winnings. He wanted the sea guarded at any cost betwixt Middleburg and Orwell. He knew well how to profit from the exchange of French crowns. This worthy man well employed his wit. No man knew that he was in debt, so stately was he of behavior in his bargains and borrowings. Truly he was a worthy man. But to speak the truth, I know not the name men call him. There was also a clerk of Oxford who had attended lectures on logic long ago. His horse was as lean as a rake, and he himself was not fat but looked hollow and sober. His outer cape was threadbare, for he had got him as yet no permanent church appointment, nor was he so worldly as to have secular employment, for he preferred to have at his bedside 20 books of Aristotle's philosophy, clad in black or red than rich robes, or a fiddle or gay harp. Although he was a philosopher, he had little gold in his chest. All that he might gain from his friends, he spent on books and learning, and busily prayed for their souls that gave him wherewith to attend school. Of study, he took most heed and care. Not one word he spoke more than was needful, and that was said short, quick, and full of high import, form, and reverence. His discourse tended to moral virtue. He would gladly learn, and gladly teach. A sergeant at law, wary and wise, had often been at St. Paul's church porch. Full rich of excellence he was, discreet and of great importance, or so he seemed. His words were so profound. Often he served as a justice in assize by patent or commission from the crown. Because of his knowledge and high renown, he took large fees and owned many robes. As great a buyer of land was never known. All was fee simple to him, his claims could never be suspect. Nowhere was as busy a man as he, and yet he seemed busier than he was. He could cite all the cases and judgments that had occurred since the time of King William. He could also compose and make a deed. No man could find a flaw in his forms, and he knew every statute by heart. He rode simply in a motley coat, belted with a silk sash with narrow bars. Of his dress, I tell no longer tale. With him there was a Franklin, his beard was white as a daisy, and he had a ruddy complexion. He loved a morning sop in wine. To live in delight was ever his way, for he was practically a son of Epicurus, who believed that the highest good was pleasure. He was a great householder, a very St. Julian in his own country. His bread and ale were always excellent. Nowhere was a man with a better store of wine. His house was never without great pies of fish and flesh. They were so plentiful that it snowed meat and drink in his house and all dainties men could devise. According to the seasons of the year, he changed his fare. Many a fat partridge had him in his care, and many a bream and pike were in his pond. Woe to his cook if his sauce was not poignant and sharp, and all his gear was not ready. All day, his solid table stood ready, covered in his hall. At county sessions, he was lord and master, and often acted as a knight of the shire in Parliament. A dagger and a silken pouch hung at his girdle, white as morning milk. He had been an auditor and a sheriff. Nowhere was a worthier country gentleman. A haberdasher, a carpenter, a weaver, a dyer, and a draper were also, with us, clothed all in similar livery of a great and important guild. Fresh and new their gear was trimmed, their girdles and their pouches. Their knives were not cheaply capped with brass but silver, and were made clean and well. Each man seemed to be a fair citizen, to sit on a dais in a guildhall. Each of them had wisdom fit to be head of his fraternity. They had enough goods and income, and their wives would agree, or else they were at fault. It is good to be called madam and walk to church before the others, and have one's mantle borne regally. A cook they had with them, just for the journey, to boil chickens with the marrow bones and spicy powders and herbs. Well, he could recognize a draught of London ale. He could roast, seethe, broil, fry, make broths, and bake a pie well. Capon stew he made, no man made it better. But it was a great pity that he had a sore on his chin. A shipman there was that dwelt far in the west. For all I know he was of Dartmouth. He rode upon a nag as well as he knew how in a gown of thick rough cloth falling to the knee. He had a dagger hanging down under his arm on a cord about his neck. The hot summer had made his hue all brown. He was certainly a good fellow, full many a draught of wine he had, privily drawn on a voyage from Bordeaux, while the merchant slept. For conscience, he cared not a straw. If he fought and had the upper hand of his enemies, he sent them home to every country by water. But in skill to be wary against danger, to reckon well his tides, currents, harbour and pilotage, there was none such from Hull to Carthage. He was hardy and prudent in a venture. By many a storm, his beard had been shaken. He knew well all the havens from Gothland to the Cape of Finisterre, and every creek in Spain and Brittany. His barge was called the Madeleine. A doctor of physic was with us. In all this world, there was none like him for surgery and physics, for he was well grounded in astrology. He could choose a fortunate ascendant for his images by horoscopes and natural magic. He knew the cause of every ailment, whether hot humor or cold, moist or dry, where it was engendered, and what humor. He was truly a perfect practitioner. The cause and the root of his illness were known, and he straightway gave the sick man his remedy. He had his apothecaries ready to send him his drugs and syrups, for each of them made the other money. Their friendship was not lately begun. He knew well old Aesculapius and also old Hippocrates, Dioscorides, Rufus, Haley, Galen, Rhazes, Avicenna, Serapion, Averroes, Damascene, Constantine, Bernard, Gilbertine and Gateston. In his diet, he was measured, and included no excess therein. He ate for nourishment and ease of digestion. He read little of the Bible. He was clad all in scarlet and blue, lined with taffeta, and yet he was moderate in expenditure. He kept the gold he made in time of pestilence, for gold in physics is cordial, therefore, he loved gold especially. A good wife there was from near Bath, but she was somewhat deaf, which was a pity. She had such skill in making cloth, that she surpassed those of Ypres and Ghent. In all the parish, no wife should walk before her to the offering. If any did, she was so angry that she was clean out of charity. Her kerchiefs were woven fine, I dare swear they weighed 10 pounds, which she wore on her head on a Sunday. Her hose was of fine scarlet, tied full close, and her shoes were new and supple. Her face was bold, fair, and red of hue. She was a worthy woman. She had had 5 husbands at the church door in addition to other company in her youth, but there's no need to speak of that now. 3 times she had journeyed to Jerusalem. She had passed many a far stream. She had been at Rome and Bologna, St. James in Galicia, and Cologne. She knew much of wandering by the way. To speak truly, she was gap-toothed. She sat easily upon an ambler, well wimpled, and on her head a hat as broad as a buckler or a target. Rug was tucked about her large hips, and a pair of sharp spurs were on her feet. Well could she laugh and banter in company? I suspect she knew of remedies of love, for she knew the old dance in that art. A good man of religion. There was a poor parson of a town, but rich in holy thought and labor. He was also a learned man, a clerk, who would preach truly Christ's gospel and devoutly instruct his parishioners. He was benign, wondrous, diligent, and patient in adversity, often so he proved to be. It was hateful to him to excommunicate parishioners for his tithes. In truth, he gave his poor parishioners from the offerings at church, and even of his own goods. In very little, he could find enough. His parish was wide and the houses far apart, but rain or thunder did not prevent him, in sickness or misfortune, from visiting the farthest in his parish, great and small, on foot, and in his hand a staff. He gave his sheep this noble example, which he wrought first and afterward taught. He took these words from the Gospel: "If gold rusts, what shall iron do? For if a priest is foul, whom we trust, no wonder a layman rusts. Let a priest consider how shameful a defiled shepherd and a clean sheep are. By the good example of his cleanness, a priest ought to show how his sheep should live. He did not rent out his position for gold, leave his sheep to founder in the mire, or run unto St. Paul's in Londo to seek a chantry for rich men's souls, or to be retained in an abbey. He dwelt at home and kept his fold so well that the wolf could not make his plans miscarry. He was a shepherd, not a hireling. Even though he was virtuous and holy, he was not pitiless to sinful men, or arrogant and aloof in his speech. In his teaching, he was wise and benign. His method was to draw folks to heaven by fair living and good example, unless it was an obstinate person. An obstinate person, of high or low degree, he would chastise sharply for his sin. I believe there was nowhere a better priest. He claimed no pomp and veneration. He did not make himself a nice conscience. Instead, he taught the lore of Christ and his 12 apostles, but first, he followed it himself. A plowman, his brother, was with him, who had drawn many a cartload of dung. He was a good, true toiler, living in peace and perfect charity. He loved God best with his whole heart, in joy or heaviness. And then he loved his neighbor, and last himself. For Christ's sake he would thresh and delve and ditch for every poor man without pay if it lay in his power. He paid his tithes full, fair and well, both for his own labor and his goods. He rode in a tabard upon a mare. There were also a reeve and a miller, a summoner and a pardoner, a manciple and myself, there were no more. The miller was a stout churl, big of brawn and bones as was well proved. For wherever he went, he would always win the ram at wrestling. He was short-shouldered and broad, a thick, gnarled fellow. There was no door he could not heave off its hinges or break with his skull by running at it. His beard was red as a sow or fox and broad as a spade. Upon the very tip of his nose, he had a wart, and on it stood a tuft of hairs as red as a sow's ear bristles. His nostrils were black and wide, his mouth was as great as a great furnace door. A sword and buckler he bore beside him. He was a prattler and a buffoon, and the noise he made was mostly ribaldries and sin. He could steal corn and charge 3 times his fees, yet he had a thumb of gold. He wore a white coat and a blue hood. He could blow and sound the bagpipe, and that's how he brought us out of town. There was a worthy manciple of an inn of court, which stewards should use as an example of buying food and drink. Whether he paid cash or took on credit, he was always so wary in his dealings that he was well before others and in good case. Now, is not grace from God that such a plain man's wit shall surpass the wisdom of a heap of learned clerks? More than 30 masters he had, who were careful and expert in law. In that group, there were a dozen worthy of being stewards of rent and estate to any lord in England and letting him live by his own property in honor without debt, unless he was insane or lived as frugally as he liked. These men could have helped a whole shire, yet this manciple hoodwinked them all. The reeve was a slender, cranky man. His beard was shaved as close as a razor can, his hair by his ears was shorn round and docked in front like a priest's. Long and lean were his legs, like a staff, no calf could be seen. He could manage a bin and granary and no auditor could prove him in fault. He could foretell how much his seed and grain should yield in drought or showery season. His lord's sheep, dairy, cattle, swine, horses, stores, and poultry were wholly under the governance of this reeve since his lord was 20 years of age. No man could find him in arrears. There was no bailiff, nor herdsman, nor any other farmhand that did not know this reeve's trickery and deceit. They dreaded him as much as death. He could afford better than his lord could. Richly had he stored up for himself in private. He could please his lord by giving and lending him of his lord's own wealth and win thanks for it, and also a coat and hood. His dwelling was fair on a heath, green trees shadowed the place. In youth, he had learned a good trade, he was an excellent carpenter. This reeve sat on a full good cob that was dapple grey and named Scott. He had on a long surcoat of blue, and he bore at his side a rusty blade. He was of Norfolk, from a town men call Baldiswell. His coat was tucked up about him like a friar's, and he always rode last in our troop. A summoner was with us there that had a fire-red cherub's face, or he was pimpled eczema, and his eyes were slit small. He was as lecherous and hot as a sparrow, with scabby black brows and a scanty beard. Children were afraid of his face. There was no mercury, litharge, sulfur, borax, white lead, cream of tartar, or ointment that would rust and cleanse, that could help him with his white blotches and boils on his face. He loved garlic, onions, and leeks, and drinking strong wine, red as blood. Then, he would talk and shout as if he were mad, and when he drank deeply of the wine, he would speak no word but Latin. He knew a few terms, 3 or 4, that he had learned out of some decrees. No wonder, he heard them all day long. You know well how a jay can cry what? As well as the Pope could? But if a man should test him in other Latin, then he had used up all his learning and would shout, Quaestio quid juris? He was a kind and worthy rogue, a better fellow is not to be met with. For a quart of ale, he would allow a good fellow to pursue his vices for a 12-month, and excuse him fully. Between you and me, he could also fleece a dupe. And if he found a good fellow anywhere, he would teach him to have no awe of the archdeacon's excommunication, unless the man's soul were in his purse, for in his purse, he should be punished. Purse, said he, is the archdeacon's hell, but I know he lied. Every guilty man should dread excommunication, for the Holy Church's curse will slay, even as absolution saves. And also let him beware of a significavit nobis. He had at his mercy the indiscreet young folk of the diocese, knew their secrets, and was their adviser. On his head, he had set a garland as great as if it were for an alehouse sign, and he had a round loaf of bread for a shield. There rode with him a gentle pardoner of the house of Blessed Mary in Charing. his friend and his gossip that had just come from the court of Rome. Loudly he sang, "Come hither, love, to me." This summoner joined him singing bass, and never did trumpet make half so great a sound. This pardoner had hair as yellow as honey, hanging smooth by ounces like a hank of flax, and it overspread his shoulders, but lay thin in locks, one by one. He wore no hood as a jest, for it was trussed up in his wallet. Except for his cap, he rode bareheaded with locks dangling. It seemed he went in the latest style. He had such glaring eyes as has a hare. He had sewed an image of Christ's face on his cap, and before him on his pommel lay his wallet, full of pardons hot from Rome. He had a voice as small as a goat's. He had no beard nor ever would have, his face was as smooth as it was lately shaved. But in his trade, there was not such another pardoner from barrack to wear. For in his wallet he had a pillowcase, which he said was Our Lady's veil. He had a scrap, he said, of the sail that St. Peter had when he walked upon the sea when Jesus Christ caught him. He had a cross all set with simulated jewels, and he had some pig's bones in a bottle. With these relics, when he found a poor parson dwelling in the country, he got more money in one day than the parson got in 2 months. By flattery and tricks of hypocrisy, he made the people and the parson his apes. But to end with, he was a noble ecclesiast in church. He could read a tale or a lesson, but best of all, he could sing an offertory. He knew well that when the song ended, he must preach and polish his tongue to win silver as best he could. Therefore, he sang so merry and loud. Now I have told you in a few words the rank, the equipment, and the number of this company, and also why it was assembled in Southwark at the Tabard Inn, close by the Bell. But now it is time to tell you how we bore ourselves that night when we dismounted at that hostelry. And afterward, I will tell of our journey and the rest of our pilgrimage. But first I pray that you will not ascribe it to rudeness that I speak plainly, in telling you their words, and their means of cheer, and speak their very words. For this, you know as well as I, when one repeats a tale told by a man, he must report each word as well as he can, if it is in his power, no matter how rude and broad it is. If he doesn't, he may tell his tale untrue, make things up or find new words. He may not spare any man, although it was his brother, he must as well say one word as another. Christ himself spoke broadly in Holy Writ, and you know well there's no coarseness in it. Plato also says, to those who can interpret him, the word must be a cousin to the deed. Also, I pray your forgiveness if I have not set folk in their just degree, as they should be placed in rank. My wits are not the best, you understand. Our host made great cheers for us one and all, seated us at supper, and served us with food and drink as well as possible. The wine was strong, and we enjoyed the drink. A charming man was our host, fit to have been a marshal in a hall. He was a large man with dancing eyes. There is no fairer Burgess in Cheapside. Bold of speech, wise and well taught, he lacked nothing of manhood, and was also a merry man. After supper, he began to play, and after we had paid our reckonings, he spoke of joy among other matters, and said thus, "Now, masters, truly you are welcome here. By my truth, I have not seen this year so merry a company at once in this hostel as is here this night. Gladly would I make you happy if I knew how, and just now I have thought of a game to please you, and it shall cost nothing. You go to Canterbury, may God speed you and the blessed martyr reward you, and I know as you go on your way you'll tell good tales for fun. For truly there is no comfort or fun in riding along silent as a stone. Therefore, as I said before, I will furnish you with a game, and if you like it all, and accept my judgment, and agree to do as I shall tell you, tomorrow when you ride on your way then, by my Father's soul in heaven, if you be not merry, I will give up my head. Hold up your hands, without more words." Our counsel was not long to seek. It seemed not worth while to make any bones of it, and we gave him our permission without more deliberation, and bade him say his verdict. "Masters," said he, "now listen, but I pray you take it not with contempt. This is the point short and plain. Each of you on this journey, to shorten our way, shall tell 2 tales on the road to Canterbury, and on the road homeward he shall tell other 2, all of adventures that have befallen someone. And the one who tells the best of all, whose tales are of best instruction and most pleasance, shall have a supper at the cost of us all, here in this place sitting at this post, when we come from Canterbury again. And to make you the merrier, I will myself gladly go with you at mine own cost, and be your guide. And whoever opposes my judgment, shall pay all that we spend on the road, and if you agree, tell me straight away without more words, and I will prepare myself, This thing was granted, and our oaths were sworn with glad hearts. And we asked him to, as he had said, be our governor and the judge and umpire of our tales, and provide a supper at a certain price. His high and low decisions would rule us, and thus, with one mind, we committed to his judgment. And thereupon, the wine was fetched. We drank and went to rest without any longer delay. On the morrow, when the day began to spring, our host arose, was the crowing rooster to us all, and gathered us together in a flock. At a little more than a walk, we rode forth to the watering place of St. Thomas. Our host began to rein in his horse and said, Masters, listen if you will, you know your agreement, and I remind you of it. If even song and morning song are the same, let us see who shall tell the first story. As I hope to drink more ale and wine, whoever is rebel to my judgment shall pay for all that is bought by the way. Now, draw straws before we ride farther. He that has the shortest straw shall begin. Sir Knight, my lord and master, draw your straw now, for that is my will. Come nearer, my lady prioress. And you, Sir Clerk, put aside your shyness and think no more. Every man, hold out your hand. Straightway, every person began to draw. To tell briefly how it was, by chance, fate, or luck, the shortest straw fell to the knight, for which everyone was glad. He must tell his tale as was reasonable according to the promise and agreement that you have heard. What else needs to be said? And when this good man saw it was so, as one that was wise and obedient in keeping his willing promise, he said, Since I shall begin the game, why welcome be the cut, in God's name. Let us ride now, and listen to what I shall say. And with that word, we rode forward. And he with full merry cheer began his tale, and this is what he said. Here ends this book's prologue, here begins the first tale, the Knight's Tale.